Tēnā koutou katoa, good afternoon and welcome. I'll hand straight to Dr. Bloomfield to give you an update on the case investigations, and then I am going to speak a little bit about our vaccination program, of course, and some news around managed isolation and bookings. But straight to you, Dr. Bloomfield.
Ngā mihi minata, kia ora anō koutou katoa, tēnei te rā tuatoro o te wiki o te reo Māori, ko te manako kei te whakanui tonu koutou i te reo rangatira. So today we're in the third day of Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori Language Week, as you know, and I hope you, like me, are also enjoying practicing and improving your te reo during the week. Today there are 14 new cases of COVID-19 in the community. All of these are in Auckland, and it takes our total number of cases in this outbreak to 983. There are also 3 cases of COVID-19 in our managed isolation facilities. Again today, early on, it's clear that all our current new cases are linked to existing cases. An analysis of yesterday's 16 cases showed that 3 were infectious in the community, creating 10 exposure events. However, these were all largely essential businesses such as petrol stations and dairies, the visits that we would expect people to be doing, and all prior to when people were notified they were a contact. On testing, a huge thanks to people in the Auckland suburbs of Mount Eden, Massey, Mangere, Whawona, Papatoetoe, Otara and Manurewa, who have been out and got tested. We saw an increase in testing across Tamaki Makaurau yesterday with 10,341 people taking the opportunity. A huge thank you to everyone across the motu as well who's been tested, a total of 15,105 tests processed yesterday. In terms of the Auckland boundary, later this week, police will begin checking that people who are permitted to cross the boundary have got proof that they have had a test in the last 7 days. Anyone who does need a test can go to any community testing centre, GPs or urgent care clinics that are providing that anywhere in the country, or they could book in with their GP. Saliva testing is now an option, and we've seen a good uptake of saliva testing, with 176 employers covering more than 1,800 employees signing up to use that modality. And in addition, over 350 individuals have also signed up. On contact tracing, we've now got 996 active contacts being managed by our team here and public health units across the country. Of those, 93% have had direct contact and 91% have returned at least 1 test. Continued follow-up happens of these people to ensure they get their later tests as well. As has already been reported, a worker at the Auckland Hotel managed isolation facility in Auckland has tested positive for COVID-19 as part of routine surveillance testing. There is a potential link with the community case, so at this stage it's not being considered a result of in-facility MIF transmission, and ESR is rerunning the whole genome sequencing today, which should confirm that case is linked to the existing outbreak. We know the worker was fully vaccinated and is also now in quarantine. I want to emphasise the vast majority of doctors and other health professionals support our vaccination program. More recently, this has sparked a deliberate grassroots initiative of doctors who want to help answer questions that people may have about the vaccine. This is called Doctors Stand Up for Vaccination. Within less than 40 hours of this being promulgated on social media, there were more than 2,000 signatures of support from doctors, and within a week, over 4,500. There's huge support from our health professionals, including doctors, for our vaccination program, and just a very small number who don't agree with the program. There have also been claims on social media that people's natural immunity or vitamin C are sufficient to fight COVID-19, so there's no need to either get tested or indeed get vaccinated. This is not the case. This is an infectious virus that can cause serious and ongoing health problems, not just the acute infectious illness, but, as you know, long COVID symptoms. And so on to an update about treatments for COVID-19 in New Zealand. Yesterday, I noted my warning about potential misuse of ivermectin, which hasn't been shown to be safe or effective for the treatment of COVID-19. However, even though there have been relatively few cases in New Zealand, we are up to date in terms of our knowledge and use of appropriate treatments. We have good processes in place to assess emerging and new treatments and a fast and proven approval process when we decide on which ones we want to use here. Just a note on how the main medications and treatments for COVID-19 work. COVID-19 infections cause two major issues in people. First of all is the viral attack on the body and the harm that causes in and of itself. And the second is that in some cases the virus can trigger an immune reaction, which can cause further problems. So new treatments are now being investigated and indeed used to cover both these areas, and they concentrate on three domains. First of all, antiviral drugs that limit the ability of the virus to replicate and thrive in the body. An example here is remdesivir, which has been used for quite a while internationally and is being used in New Zealand. There are then, secondly, medicines that calm the immune system overreaction that is prompted in some patients, and particularly those who end up very unwell and in ICU. An example here is dexamethasone, which is a standard and widely used steroid, and it's been part of our routine treatment protocols here for some time for people who are very unwell in ICU. And then third, there are antibody treatments that help the body fight the virus. Studies have shown that one of these, a monoclonal antibody called tocilizumab, may help hospitalise patients by reducing the severity of their infection and the length of time they require in hospital. Pharmac recently completed consulting with clinicians on funding tocilizumab for the treatment of moderate to severe COVID-19 in New Zealand. They will make a decision soon about its ongoing funding, but in the meantime, it has already been used and funded by Pharmac for treatment in more than 30 patients through an exceptions-based process. There are several other monoclonal antibodies in trials or approved overseas under emergency authorisation, and Pharmac is actively discussing those with the manufacturers and suppliers. Two new treatments are showing the most promise. The first is Ronapreve, which is showing benefit in the early treatment of COVID-19 and can help cases from developing. It complements rather than replaces vaccination, as all these treatments do. An application has been made to MedSafe in the last couple of weeks, and the UK counterpart of MedSafe has actually approved that treatment in the UK. MedSafe is looking at all the evidence to see if this is a medication we will want to use in New Zealand, and then Pharmac will move on the funding of it. A second promising monoclonal antibody treatment is sotrovimab. This is another one that is similar to Ronapreve, and it complements rather than replaces vaccination. Some good data coming through from evidence in trials, and MedSafe has not yet received an application. However, the Ministry is engaging with Pharmac to already explore potential supply options and encourage an application for approval through to MedSafe. In the meantime, any of these medications can be prescribed by a doctor if they are indicated and if available here. Even if there's not an approval through MedSafe, they can be prescribed off-label. We have a technical advisory group of clinicians who meet weekly since late August, and it's providing updated advice to us all the time on emerging treatments. Finally, a shout out today for our midwives, in particular those working in Tamaki Makaurau during Alert Level 4. As you would imagine, much of their work is face-to-face and with the usual protections and use of PPE to ensure that pregnant women get the care and services they need. Happily, babies don't know it's lockdown and they continue arriving. It's timely to remind anyone in the country who is expecting a baby about the importance of getting vaccinated. We have seen some unvaccinated pregnant women arriving in hospital with COVID-19, quite unwell as a result of the virus. It's now very clear from experience globally and our experience here, with a large number of pregnant people now vaccinated, there are no additional safety concerns with getting the COVID-19 Pfizer vaccine. It is safe at any stage in pregnancy, and vaccinating during pregnancy also helps protect your baby, as there is evidence that infants can get antibodies of the virus through cord blood and then once they are born through breast milk. Most importantly, the vaccine will keep pregnant women out of hospital and indeed, if they're very unwell, out of ICU. Birth is a time to celebrate, not a time to worry about the effects of COVID-19. Hei ana, Ka nui tēnā, kia ora koutou katoa. Back to you, Minita.
Thank you, Dr. Bloomfield. Some good news just out of Auckland International Airport. I can confirm that the first batch of doses that we purchased from Denmark touched down a little over an hour ago. These 250,000 doses, along with the 275,000 doses that we purchased from Spain last week, means that there is now nothing holding back our COVID-19 vaccination campaign. 62,000 doses were administered across the country yesterday. 26,793 of those were in Auckland. That means nationwide, of our eligible population, those aged 12 plus, more than 70% have now received at least one dose of the vaccine. 36% have received their second dose and are therefore fully vaccinated. However, underneath those numbers sits some challenges that we still need to highlight. 48% of Māori have had their first dose, 23% their second. 62% of Pacific peoples have had their first dose, and 32% have had their second. We're doing very well in the older age brackets. 90% of our 65 pluses have had their first dose, and 76% have had their second dose. For those aged between 40 to 64, those numbers are coming along nicely. 76% have had their first dose and 39% their second. So these are good numbers, they're encouraging numbers, but we need to see those continuing to climb. For those under the age of 40, we've got a lot of work to do there. And so please, if you haven't received your first dose and you're not booked in, please make sure you're booking in. There is a lot of availability of space in the vaccine program. It is easy to book. Bookmyvaccine.nz is the way to do it. It's easy to do, and we are asking all New Zealanders who have not booked in to make sure that you're booking in to get your vaccine. We are particularly focused on Auckland this week, of course. The Auckland DHBs have so far vaccinated over 1 million people, with over 500,000 people having received both doses. By the end of this week, we want everyone across metropolitan Auckland to have had the opportunity to have had their first dose. And we are making every effort to make sure that happens. The Northern Response Vaccination Centres are allowing walk-ins at all of their community vaccination sites. The number of pharmacies joining the vaccine rollout continues to rise. There are currently 51 pharmacies across metropolitan Auckland carrying out vaccines, and so far they've delivered over 170,000 vaccinations. A further 81 pharmacies will be joining the program very soon. At GP clinics, 118 sites are live, and a further 109 are being brought on board. As the Prime Minister revealed previously, we are launching our first vaccination buses tomorrow. Details are being finalised, but they'll basically be acting as pop-up vaccination centres to deliver outside of the bus to ensure that appropriate social distancing can be observed. We'll be taking the vaccination buses to areas where vaccination numbers are low, or where we know communities might be finding it more difficult to access the existing vaccination services we're providing. We're looking to extend this program to up to 12 buses to make sure that we can reach communities across the wider Auckland area over the coming weeks. So we want to make it as easy as possible for everyone to get vaccinated, and particularly so if you're in Auckland. It is our best protection as we plan to move down alert levels. On to managed isolation and quarantine. As I indicated here a couple of weeks ago, we did have to make a very difficult decision to pause the further release of vouchers for managed isolation in light of the growing number of community cases we were needing to accommodate in our MIQ facilities. And I do want to acknowledge again now, as I did then, that that poses a significant challenge for Kiwis who have been looking to return home, and for others who have a good reason for wanting to come to New Zealand. So today I have some further good news. I can confirm that that pause will be lifted from Monday the 20th of September. The local pressure on our MIQ system has started to ease, and we do have rooms available between now and Christmas. The first 3,000 or so of those rooms will be released from Monday. 4,000 rooms a fortnight will be released in stages over these months, as is our usual practice. As I signalled previously, the way people apply for these rooms will change. So, some critical times. from 8 a.m. on Monday, New Zealand time, the lobby will be open and the room releases will start from 9 a.m. The whole system is designed to improve the experience for those using the Managed Isolation Allocation System, MIAS, and to level the playing field. But I do want to stress again, it isn't a silver bullet, and we are fully expecting that there will be more demand for the rooms than there are rooms available. While we make it easier for people who are fully vaccinated to come into New Zealand, while we're looking at the options to do that from next year, we do expect that pressure on our managed isolation facilities will continue through at least until the end of this year. More than 170,000 people have come back into New Zealand through that system. That is a much larger portion than other comparable countries have accommodated through their managed isolation, but there of course are still those unavoidable constraints. So the lobby system is a big change, and all the detail on how it will work will be up on the MIQ website shortly. But I want to make a couple of quick points. It's not a first in, first served model. So if you join any time between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. New Zealand time, that will secure you an ability to participate in the process. Everybody who enters the lobby during that time will have an equal chance of getting an invitation to book. People will be held in the lobby until the room release begins. Then people will be automatically and randomly moved into a queue. When they get to the front of the queue, they'll be gradually allowed through the website in order to secure a room. There's no need to refresh the website regularly anymore. There's no limit on the number of people that can enter the lobby, thus registering that they are trying to secure a room. Once all the rooms have been taken, all of the available rooms that have been taken, the lobby will be closed. Anybody who is left in the queue or left in the lobby will be informed that the bookings have been completed for the day. That is until the next tranche of rooms is ready, and we will signal when those rooms are being released so that people will be able to come back to the site and take part in that process again. A few very important points. It is important that people know their preferred flight route and select the correct date for arrival once they are in the system. We don't want people to just grab any date if there aren't flights available that will get them there at that date. That could potentially see us wasting rooms. When we've got demand at such high levels, we don't want to see that happen. So people need to check the flight checker on the website before the lobby opens and make sure they're selecting an appropriate date. For people who are wanting to travel from Australia, Monday's voucher release will not include red flights from Australia at this time, so they won't be able to participate on Monday. However, we are planning another voucher release in September, which we do expect people in Australia to be able to access. We'll be able to confirm that when a decision on the Trans-Tasman bubble, which we're expecting to be able to make in the next week, when we make that decision, we will signal the availability of red flights for people coming from Australia. So for people who, and I also just want to remind anybody overseas, Australia or anywhere else, that where there is a need for urgent travel, you don't have to chance your luck with the MIAS booking system. There are criteria for urgent travel, and we have rooms ring-fenced for that. So if you meet those criteria, if you do need an emergency allocation, please check the website to see whether you meet those criteria and put an application in for those. If you are successful going through that process, then you won't have to go through the MIAS booking system. So with that, happy to open up for questions. Jessica.
So this system is now based on luck rather than on need or the length of time you've been waiting. Why is that better?
We've got an emergency allocation, so those with a pressing need, with an urgent need to come home, they can come home. And if there is time sensitivity around that, we work very hard to try and accommodate that within the emergency allocation system. This new process that we've put in place means that the luck is equally shared, rather than whether your web browser is faster and you're refreshing faster, or whether you happen to be online at the time the rooms are being released. So we're trying to give everyone an equal opportunity here.
People like Morris Williamson are suggesting a point system. So if your need is greater, if you've been waiting for longer, is that something you considered for this?
There's a lot of complexity with a points-based system, and for a 2-week stay in managed isolation, standing up a booking system that was based on, what would effectively be quite a detailed needs assessment where people would have to be able to produce evidence that could be verified, the burden associated with that would be significant. So if we think about the nearest comparable example, it's people applying for visas. You apply for a visa, you work your way through the point system. It takes months to process that. There is an army of people who go through and verify all of that documentation. If we were going to do that for managed isolation rooms so that people could, secure a 2-week booking, that would be a huge system, and it would potentially mean it would take a lot longer for people to be able to access vouchers.
Do you have an idea of what the demand will be, like roughly how many people might be in that lobby?
I think the first opening of the lobby will certainly give us an indication of that, and so I think that will be useful and help us to inform future voucher releases and so on. But I do just want to reiterate again here the importance of people making sure that they've got their flight details and things sorted so that they're not just jumping online and booking anything that's available, because that would potentially mean that it's not going to be, we wouldn't get the most use out of the rooms we've got available.
You have some sort of idea, do you, based on previous bookings?
Well, there's a lot of Kiwis out there. As to how many of them are looking to come back into New Zealand, we don't have an accurate gauge on that. Coming over here.
Thank you. Kiwis have previously been up against bots and third parties. Can you guarantee that this new system isn't gameable?
The lobby system is designed to ensure that bots can't, that digital bots and algorithms can't access it. In terms of third parties, there's no way of absolutely locking down the ability for someone to get someone else to book a voucher on their behalf. Sometimes there's very legitimate reasons why someone might be booking a voucher on behalf of somebody else. It is not something that we encourage, but there can be legitimate reasons for it. But it'll be a very, very difficult thing to stop.
So the system was designed so that bots can't game it and Kiwis have a fair chance?
That's correct, yes.
And just follow on that, is it fair that superannuants are having their pensions cut because they can't get spots in MIQ and get home in time?
Look, I know my colleague, the Minister of Social Development, has been working on that issue. I mean, ultimately that sits within her portfolio area. So I direct you to her. I just haven't had a chance to talk to her about that in the last few days, but I know that that is something that she has been working on.
You've raised it with her that there is this issue of Kiwis stuck overseas and they can't get home in 26 weeks because of actions.
I know that she is well aware of it. I don't want to make any pronouncements on her behalf. That's ultimately her domain, but I'm aware that she certainly is aware of all of the issues around that and has been doing work on that. I'd get you to direct your question to her. Luke.
Forgive me if you already said this. How far in advance are the first tranche of flights? So what time period will they cover? And then how far in advance will the lobby keep being opened up for flights in the future?
So this deals with bookings between now and December. Typically we release the closer bookings in larger numbers and hold back some of the further advanced dates, but we release some of the further advanced dates. So we won't be releasing lots in December, but we will be releasing some in December. We'll be releasing quite a lot of the October capacity that's available. We'll be releasing quite a lot of that next week. There are some bookings that are quite short notice bookings, space available. So some that starts in September. So some of that will be released pretty much everything that's left in September will be released next week. There's not a lot of it, but what there is will be released next week. Quite a lot of October, a little bit of November, a little bit of December, and then obviously as we go along, we release more of those forward months. I'll come up to Mikey.
Minister, is it ever acceptable to be deporting people during a global pandemic?
Ultimately, different countries will make different decisions on that, and I'm not going to...
Because we're still deporting people despite there being a global pandemic, including to Fiji, who's having a really rough time at the moment.
Look, that's not something that I have been briefed on, so it's not a decision that I'm involved in the process on there. Ultimately, other ministers have jurisdiction there, so you'd best direct your question to them.
Disappointed though, knowing that we are deporting people back to Fiji, considering as the COVID-19 recovery minister, you yourself knows how difficult it is to deal with the pandemic, knowing what's happening in Fiji in particular.
Oh, look, I would say that we are providing a lot of support to Fiji. We have people on the ground in Fiji helping. We've been supplying vaccines to Fiji. As a global community, yes, we are all in this together. The issue of deportations is not one that I'm in a position to comment on, though.
Are you confident that on Monday that the MIQ website itself will be able to deal with the sort of onslaught of people in the lobby?
That's one of the things the lobby is designed to achieve. One of the risks that we had previously is if we foreshadowed when we were going to be releasing rooms for booking, and everybody jumped on at the same time and tried to book them at the same time, the whole thing would fall down. So this is a way that we can allow people to get on the website. They can register their interest in booking a room. They can do that in very large numbers, and then the system then manages the through demand as they go through the booking process to make sure that the site can cope with that. Because clearly, if there are tens of thousands of people trying to access rooms all at the same time, that's going to create problems, and so this will avoid that problem.
Dr. Bloomfield, with the vaccination rates, why are some DHBs lagging behind? Why are some DHBs getting ahead with vaccination rates, and why are others lagging behind? What's being done to work with those DHBs?
Yeah, so every DHB has for some months put up a plan of what of how they're going to go about vaccinating, starting with obviously groups 1, 2 and 3. I'm not at all bothered about about DHBs getting ahead, and I think it's always relative. Then some DHBs are below the average, but all DHBs are delivering ahead of what their original plans were. There is no problem now with capacity in the system to deliver in any DHB, so the opportunity is there for people to be vaccinated.
Why is that happening? Is it population density? Is it because some people are making it, some DHBs are making it easier? Why do you think that's happening?
Different approaches taken by different DHBs and different sequencing really of how they are bringing on general practices, pharmacies and different approaches. And I guess if you look at, say, some of our DHBs that have got more rural populations, then they need very specific initiatives to get out and get to those populations. What I am confident is that every DHB has the capacity and the different approaches in place to ensure that all their population can be vaccinated by the end of the year.
One of the things for letting people out of MIQ when they're a case is obviously the symptom check. How can you be certain that an asymptomatic case is no longer infectious without testing them?
Well, there are a couple of things that are done. First of all, there's a clinical assessment to make sure that they haven't had symptoms for at least a 10-day period, for at least a 72-hour period, and that it's at least 10 days since their symptom onset. And in fact, on that latter, because of Delta, and one of the things we've had advice on is we've increased that to at least a 14-day period before people are adjudged to be recovered.
So everyone's being judged at 14 days now?
Well, that has to be the 14 days, a minimum of 14 days, plus at least 72 hours with no symptoms.
And Minister, there remains concern that outbreak response was not closely focused enough on the needs of Māori and Pacifica people. Do you think in hindsight you could have done better?
With every outbreak that we've dealt with, every COVID-19 related issue that we've dealt with the benefit of hindsight, you'll find things that could have been done better. We absolutely go through a process of making sure we identify those. So where the response can be sharpened up, of course, we debrief, we look at that. Some of that actually happens in real time. So where we're identifying that there's improvements that can be made, we try and make them as fast as we can. But of course, we will always look back whenever there's been something like this and say, if confronted with this again, are there things that we would change?
Those communities down?
No, I think that the overall approach to COVID-19 elimination in New Zealand has served our communities incredibly well, and our Māori and Pacific communities in particular, who we know could have some very adverse outcomes if COVID-19 was allowed to spread within our community. So I think all New Zealanders have been playing their part in driving COVID out of the community again. That protects our most vulnerable, it protects everybody, and so I'll absolutely stand by the decisions that we've taken in that regard. Are there going to be things at the margins where we could say, well, we could do that better? Of course there will be, and we always look for those. I'll come over to you, Amelia.
On people coming from Australia unable to be part of the Monday release and an announcement on the Trans-Tasman bubble coming next week, are you signalling that you could resume green zone flights with some states?
No, I'm not. It's just that without wanting to get ahead of the decision there, there's issues around flight scheduling and a whole lot of other things that need to be worked through before we can give any certainty to people in Australia. But my clear message to people in Australia is I wouldn't be banking on the Trans-Tasman bubble reopening anytime soon. I'll finish that.
So they're likely to have to use the MIQ system, the bubble's out before Christmas.
I wouldn't necessarily, well, I don't want to put a particular timetable on it. That's one of the things that the Cabinet will have to make a decision on if we are extending the suspension, and I think that is likely. We'll have to make a decision about for how long we are doing that. And then, of course, there is a whole lot of decisions that flow from that around flight scheduling and all of those sorts of things. We will have answers to that within the next week or so.
Look, just on the vaccine rollouts, possibly on you, Dr. Bloomfield. Obviously, the daily numbers have come down from the elevated peak a couple of weeks ago. I mean, does it look like at this point now we've actually seen the peak big days, and now we would expect, just given the amount of population that's vaccinated, that would continue to come down?
Well, I know the Minister has aspirations here, and so do I. I would hope that we have days where we exceed our previous peaks, and hence the message, and I'm pleased to hear that there are going to be a range of media channels are going to be supporting this. It's incredibly important we get our vaccination rate up as high as possible. And that means everybody who is eligible getting out there and being vaccinated. And I hope that as part of that, because the capacity is there in the system, that we actually exceed our previous high points.
So the ultimate answer to your question, Luke, is those under the age of 40, that's who it comes down to. So if we see large numbers of people under the age of 40 coming forward and booking in, so that their vaccination levels start to match those of older age cohorts, then we will continue to see a high level of vaccine delivery in New Zealand. There is no risk around supply now. We have got plenty of vaccines available. We've got plenty of capacity available. It now comes down to Kiwis booking in and coming forward and getting their vaccines.
And just on school holidays, yesterday you said you're receiving advice from the Ministry on whether to pull them forward. What's the thinking behind that? Are you leaning away particularly one way or the other, particularly in Auckland, for what might happen with school holidays?
Look, I'm working through all of the ins and outs of that. I do want to acknowledge that it is quite a complex decision. It's not just a cut and dry issue. I want to acknowledge for parents, they've been at home for a long period of time with their kids. That creates some challenges. I will certainly be looking at what's best educationally for the kids. I want to acknowledge that there's some very strong feedback from the teaching community about the prospect of shifting school holidays this late in the year, given all of the other pressures that go on towards the end of the year. And I also want to acknowledge that the last time we did that, it was at the beginning of this whole process. Teachers hadn't been teaching from home for that period of time. They have actually been teaching from home over the last month. So there's a lot that we've got to work through. We haven't made a final decision on it yet. There are arguments both ways, and so we'll make a decision ultimately based on what's going to be best educationally for the kids.
Are you concerned that, particularly in Auckland, the ongoing, basically Zoom classrooms, do you have a concern that they are really exacerbating existing inequalities within the system?
If you look at the digital divide existed before COVID-19. COVID-19 didn't create it, but it certainly highlighted it. And we've done a lot of work over the last year and a half to start closing that digital divide with, getting internet connections to those households that didn't have them, getting digital devices out to kids that don't have access to them, and so on. But have we nailed that problem? No, we haven't. And the level of distance learning capacity within schools does vary. So some schools are still using hard packs of printed materials for kids to learn at home. Others are fully digital and engaged. Whole lot of different models being used out there. So yes, that creates some unevenness and some challenges. Now, the best place for kids is still in school. It's still, we want to have them in school as soon as we're able to do that. At this point, I hope, we don't have a specific timetable for that yet.
Back on vaccines, Minister, have you seen any increase in bookings since you've made the plea to Aucklanders in particular?
I'd perhaps ask Dr. Bloomfield to comment on that.
I think there's been both an increase in bookings and also an increase in people going to the ones that don't require a booking, like the drive-through ones. there is still plenty of capacity. So, roll on up. The bookings are still solid for the next 2 to 3 weeks. And so we want to complement that with people also just turning up. And as the Minister said, all the vaccine centres there will now take walk-ups that will keep slots available for anyone who just wants to turn up.
All according to plan, Auckland should be going to level 3 next week. Should Aucklanders expect to be spending at least a full cycle, 14 days, then in level 3?
Look, I think when we confirm decisions around a shift in alert level for Auckland, we will foreshadow some early thinking on timeframes and timetables. There's still a lot of water to flow under the bridge, and of course, as we know with the COVID-19 response, there are no certainties here. So you have to review everything every day based on what new information you're getting. But I'd say there are some encouraging signs. So Dr. Bloomfield has already talked about the case investigations today. We're seeing fewer unlinked cases. We're seeing that while there will still be some bumps in case numbers, particularly given that we're seeing some larger groups of close contacts, that doesn't necessarily cause additional alarm. If they're people who we were already expecting could potentially be positive, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's something to be worried about. If we saw a sudden surge in unlinked cases, that might be something that we'd be more worried about. But trends are heading, generally speaking, in the right direction. But, you never say never because things can change, and they can change quite quickly. We'll come down
Just on the Trans-Tasman bubble, following from Nelly's question, what are some of the options on the table, considering it's unlikely that it will reopen from Monday or the next week? What are some of the options on the table? Is it possible or viable that you could say no Aussie bubble until the end of the year?
They're certainly possible. I think I don't want to preempt a decision that Cabinet might take. I think it is, are we going to be in the next week reopening the Trans-Tasman bubble? I think people can see what's happening in Australia and what we're still grappling with here in New Zealand and know that that's a pretty unlikely prospect. As for how long that, the suspension of the bubble could go on for, that is something that the Cabinet will be looking closely at next week.
And when you make that decision, will that be more a case of saying, hey, we'll keep suspending it for 2 months, or giving a date at which it will reopen?
I think it's more likely that it will be a rolling series of decisions because we just don't have certainty around the bubble at this point.
We have a couple of things to do with the lobby. How many people can fit in the lobby at one time between?
My understanding is it's unlimited, so people can just continue to sign up and get in there.
And also, if people then go on and cancel those rooms, they don't need them, what happens? Do they just get wasted because it's another 2 weeks?
They'd be reallocated out. So we do regularly release rooms that have been cancelled. We do that quite frequently.
So that'll continue. So you'll have this lobby system, so the 8 till 9 on the Monday morning, that'll take place with those big bulk, and then any cancellations, people will still have to keep checking in daily if they miss out.
Look, we'll ultimately look at see what the overall cancellation rate is. Whether it's I think as much as we can, we'd like to group rooms into the foreshadowed release of rooms. We haven't made decisions yet on whether there'd be out of cycle, if you like, re-releases of short notice vouchers, for example. Decision hasn't been taken on that yet.
Following up on...
Oh, sorry. Yeah, actually, I'll come down to you in front. Sorry. Now I'll come back to you.
Dr. Bloomfield, just following up on what you were saying earlier, that there's been more people who come forward to get the vaccine. The figure at the beginning of the week was 23% of eligible people haven't signed up yet. Has that? Do you have an updated figure for that?
I'll come back to you on that. I don't have that figure in front of me.
And then in terms of that, yesterday you had to comment on ivermectin. Today you had to speak about the medical approaches that can be used for COVID. The chief coroner this morning had to speak about the death of a teenager. How significant is the issue, and this is for both of you, of disinformation and misinformation when it comes to getting to that final 23% who haven't moved yet?
Well, the information about the vaccine has been out there for some time. And I guess I don't think it's so much information, whether it's the right information or mis or disinformation. The important thing is that we make sure everybody knows how they can get the vaccine and why it's important for them to do so. We've seen even just from this outbreak in Auckland, and I think it's given many people, in particular Aucklanders, a reality check that actually the virus is not just real, but it can be harmful. And it has had people in hospital and people in intensive care. It has affected hundreds of people in Auckland. the vaccine is highly protective against having symptomatic infection and getting very unwell and dying from this infection. And we've seen that even in the cases we've seen in Auckland. So I think people need to understand that and take up the opportunity. We've got a very good, very safe vaccine. I don't like to emphasise the misinformation and disinformation out there, because I think the vast majority of New Zealanders understand that getting vaccinated is the right thing, and we will make sure they can.
I think it's also important to remember that some people aren't necessarily anti-vaccination, but they have some questions. It's legitimate to have questions. Make sure that you're asking those questions of the right people, not people who are potentially spreading misinformation. So talk to your GP, talk to a nurse. The nurses are very active in the vaccination program. Listen to some of our scientific community who are out there answering people's questions about the vaccine every day, and get good, reliable, fact-based information so that you can make an informed decision. It's perfectly okay to have questions. I think everybody should have questions when it comes to these sorts of things, but don't be sucked in by misinformation. Make sure that you're asking those questions of good, trusted, reliable sources. The second point that I would make is that we have consistently seen the level of vaccine hesitance declining in New Zealand from the beginning of the year, where it was still quite a significant number, to a much, much smaller number now. And that shows that as the vaccine's being rolled out, as people are seeing that it is safe, as confidence in it grows, and then I think we can be increasingly confident that we can get up to very high levels of vaccination in New Zealand, and we can do that quickly. And we have the capacity to do it. We have the capacity in the next couple of months to be one of the most vaccinated countries in the world against COVID-19. That relies on Kiwis coming forward to get their vaccines.
The division, though, between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated overseas has become, in many places, it has become divisive. It's become emotional, and it's hardened over time. Is there anything that the New Zealand government has done that you think will make New Zealand different?
What we're also seeing from overseas is that COVID-19 is morphing into a pandemic of the unvaccinated. So yes, vaccinated people are affected by it, but nowhere near as badly as unvaccinated people are. And that is certainly true in places like the US, for example, where they've got very high vaccination rates in some areas and very low vaccination rates in others. So yes, of course, we look internationally at that. What we're seeing now, we've stayed very close to research on this around New Zealanders' attitudes towards the vaccine. I think New Zealanders are more informed about vaccines than we're seeing abroad. We're not seeing people being sucked into misinformation in New Zealand at the same rate as they are around the rest of the world. I'm incredibly proud of New Zealanders for that. And I just say to everybody who maybe does have those questions, just ask them of a trusted source. I'll come up the back here.
Some modelling data shows that towards the end of August, Māori only made up around 10% of the new cases in the community, but in the last 5 days that's jumped to about 40%. One, is that concerning? And two, what will you be looking at doing something different to help contain that?
So we're working very, very closely with our Māori and Pacific health providers. Our vaccination rates there, particularly for Māori, but also for Pacific New Zealanders, are not as high as they are for the rest of the population. And we've got a much younger age cohort in our Māori and Pacific populations. And we know that generally speaking, the younger age cohort is potentially more difficult to reach than the older age cohort is. And so, yes, of course, we're going to be pushing out to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make vaccines as widely available as possible. So it's about encouragement, but it's also about going to where the people are, making sure that the people who are going to where the people are able to provide them reassurance, to answer their questions, to give them good, impartial, fact-based information so that they can make informed decisions. So you'll see more and more of that happening.
The other data that shows that Māori are 50% more likely to die from COVID, are these numbers not concerning enough to try and change the way that services or other than vaccines are delivered to Māori communities?
Oh, well, I know the Director General would like to make a comment on this too, but I would simply take my hat off to our Māori and Pacific health providers who have been working incredibly hard to reach into those communities, to make sure that they have good information, to make sure they have access to the vaccine. And I would simply condemn those who are trying to undermine those efforts.
Can I just make a quick comment there? I think one of the things that's really impressed me about the vaccination program this year, and also the response to the outbreak over the last 4 to 5 weeks in Tamaki Makaurau, is the extent to which our Pacific and more recently Māori providers, as we've seen a bigger proportion of the more recent cases have been Māori, have been involved in the testing and also the sort of provision of manaaki support to those whānau that need that. In terms of the vaccination program, I can absolutely say we have had those providers involved right from the start, and you saw through the first 2 to 3 months that actually the rates for our over 65s were highest amongst Māori and Pacific, and that was explicitly because those providers were leading efforts and getting right out into those communities. So I think we'll see a continued strengthening of both the relationships and of those providers with further investment off the back of both the vaccination program and also the outbreak response.
We'll come here and then back up the back.
There's a report this morning of a person who this week breached the Auckland lockdown and travelled to Whakatane, and they're facing prosecution now. So do you give any details about that situation and I guess how they may have managed to get out of Auckland and if they're vaccinated, tested, that kind of thing?
Ultimately, those are issues for the New Zealand police who enforce the lockdown rules. And in the case of people who are permitted for movement, around essential movement, those are questions for MB who make those, or MB and Health who make those decisions. So no, I'm not going to comment on those, particularly not if there is a prosecution looming, or if even some kind of enforcement looming. Those are ultimately matters for those agencies. But I just simply say again, the vast majority of people in Auckland are doing it tough for the rest of the country, and we thank them for that. And the actions of if there are a handful of people who aren't doing that, they're undermining the collective team effort, and they shouldn't.
And also just, there's another report this morning about a small outbreak among a Mongol mob chapter in Tamaki Makaurau. Did you have any sort of details about that and any specific supports that have been offered to
Look, all I would say again is that we share information that we collect from people where there's a public health rationale to do so. We don't typically disclose the background information on positive COVID-19 cases or their contacts unless there is a very good reason to do that. I don't intend to start doing that now, but what I can do is provide reassurance to everybody that we're seeing a great amount of cooperation and willingness to engage from the communities of all of those who we are seeing, testing positive in the current outbreak. Sorry, I promised you back over there, but we'll come back over here.
Thank you. Can you just clarify how often the MRQ rooms will be released?
We will foreshadow, they'll be regular, so weekly, fortnightly, they'll be regular, and we will foreshadow when we are releasing them again.
And for Kiwis stuck in Australia, they went there because your government said it was safe. Is it fair that they can't be included in Monday's release alongside everyone else who's stuck in other countries around the world?
For people in New South Wales, we worked very, very hard because they are the people who were ultimately captured by the sudden closure of the Trans-Tasman travel bubble, and they didn't have an opportunity to return home. In every other part of Australia, there was an opportunity for people to come back to New Zealand before the suspension really kicked in. For those in New South Wales, we worked really hard through a prioritised process to make sure that those who needed to come back were able to come back. I appreciate that with the passage of time, people who were able to sit it out for a period of time may not be able to do that indefinitely. And so that is one of the reasons why next week, when we make that decision, we will set out a lot more specific information for people. I know that there are Kiwis over there who want to get home, and we will certainly be, they are certainly front of mind. I don't want them to possibly feel that they've been forgotten. They have not.
Is that urgent enough? This is day by day stuff these people are living by, and you're just pushing it off another week.
Look, I acknowledge that COVID-19 has caused huge disruption to a lot of people. We've currently got Auckland at a high alert level, which is restricting people from doing a lot of what they would normally do. It's difficult, and I acknowledge that it's difficult, and we work as soon as we can to provide certainty for people.
You're not giving that certainty, and also you're cutting off their pensions while they're overseas in a foreign country.
Yeah, like I said, that's a question for the Minister of Social Development. I know that she has been doing work on that issue. We'll sort of span across the room this way. Yep.
Do you know, either of you know how many, if any, people have been using ivermectin, and is it becoming an issue here like overseas?
Don't have any data on how many people have been using it. I do know there have been people going and requesting it from their GP, and you would have seen Dr. Brian Betty from the College of GPs a couple of weeks ago addressing this and also reminding people or telling people that it's not a safe treatment and they shouldn't be asking for it for this purpose. There have been people who've been wanting to and trying to import it as well, but I don't have any numbers on that.
Concerned about that? Does it need to be recorded?
That it is not recorded?
Are you concerned that it may become an issue, and do you think it should be recorded in terms of the numbers?
I don't think it needs to be recorded, and one of the reasons I've emphasised over the last 2 days that it's not a proven safe treatment is is because it is of concern if people are believing misinformation that is the case. It's not a safe proven treatment, but what people can do if they want to be safe from COVID-19 is get vaccinated. That is safe and very effective.
Luke and then Jessica.
Just on the couple who went from Auckland to Hamilton to Wanaka, firstly, do we have any information on what exemption they used to get across the border? And secondly, we understand that they took a commercial flight back up to Auckland. Is that appropriate given the potential risk?
I don't have any further information. I'll
No,
just check.
sorry, I don't have any further detail on that.
Yeah.
Judith Collins' former press secretary, Janet Wilson, had a go at Ms Collins today, saying that the attack on Susie Wiles was completely unacceptable for the leader of the National Party. Do you agree with her on that?
I noticed that Judith Collins on Radio New Zealand said this morning that thought leaders should lead by example. I do completely agree with that. I can only take from that she does not regard herself as a thought leader.
Just on, there's been suggestions around businesses offering cash incentives or, prizes to get people vaccinated. What responsibility do businesses have on encouraging their staff to get vaccinated?
Look, I think businesses should encourage their staff to be vaccinated. One of the best things that they can do at this point is make sure that they have the time to go and be vaccinated and to fully support them in that decision. And we're seeing really, really good support from employers for people to do that. I haven't got anything further to say around incentives at this point. Ultimately, the biggest incentive should be that people don't want to get COVID-19 and want to protect themselves and protect their families and protect their community. That has to be the number one incentive here, and everybody should be focused on that. Vaccination keeps yourself and the people who you love and care about, helps to keep them safe.
Those monoclonal antibody drugs that are being considered by vaccine, why did MedSafe not proactively request clinical trial data from the manufacturer and instead wait for them to apply, given the potential benefits that they could have?
Yes, so MedSafe requires the manufacturer to put in an application, which is quite a detailed process for approval. Just to go back to one of my earlier comments, that doesn't stop those medications from being used. There is a section under the Medicines Act that allows clinicians to use those medications even prior to there being an application and approval, and indeed in this case even they can also be publicly funded.
Yeah. With regards to vital loss members in Auckland isolating, should that woman that reportedly presented to Middlemore, got a COVID test and discharged herself before the result, should she have been able to go while there was a COVID test pending, considering Auckland is in lockdown at the moment?
I'll hand that one to the Director General.
Yes, that's not unusual. There was no obligation on there's no obligation on anyone to stay. They can, of course, self-discharge. I think the important thing here is as soon as the positive result was received, the person was followed up and found very, very quickly, and then that triggered a whole range of follow-up contact tracing.
Just following up on that, considering the number of people at that residence where she returned to, is there any risk, sort of broader risk, because of the number of people that are involved?
Well, actually, the residence she returned to was with her whānau, which included her partner and a young child. And, of course, what I can say, and as the Minister alluded to, both she and others who may have been contacts have been very well engaged and cooperative with the follow-up contact tracing. So that's really what we're after here is we need to find cases and we need to just stop any further spread. And in that case, there's nothing that I'm concerned about.
Lucky last.
The vaccine data released today shows that only about a third of Group 4 have not yet been vaccinated, but that rises to 60% for Group 3. Do you know why that might be, or have any concerns about that?
Look, I think there's potentially some data issues in there, and that some of the estimates of the size of Group 3, some of those people could have actually been vaccinated as part of Group 4. So happy to go away and sort of crunch that down. I don't know whether the Director General wants to add to that, but I know those earlier groups, of course, are all ultimately subsets of Group 4. And so some people will have been vaccinated through Group 4 that could have counted in Groups 1, 2 or 3, but have ultimately been counted in Group 4 instead.
Yeah, I would just add, I think that the important thing, if you think about Group 3, we should really be looking across combined both Groups 3 and 4, what the coverage is. Groups 1 and 2 are a little bit different because they're in higher risk, usually higher risk occupations, so we're particularly interested in getting them fully vaccinated as soon as possible.
Across the past couple of days, or the past couple of weeks actually, each day there's been at least a few cases that were infectious in the community. It's not usually a large number, but a few. How low does that number need to go for you to feel confident putting Auckland in level 3, with this likelihood that there might still be a couple cases each day that are infectious while they're in the community?
I've never put hard and fast numbers on anything. Ultimately, you look at a range of different factors. Yes, that's one of the things that we'd look at. So are we seeing unlinked cases? Are we seeing people who are active in the community? What's the nature of their activity in the community and the level of risk that comes from that? How many people do we have isolating in the sense of known contacts who are isolating that we're waiting for test results for? How many do we have test results for, and what does that tell us? These are all things that we look at. So there aren't hard and fast rules here. You do have to, I guess, digest quite a range of different information and making decisions around alert levels and future courses of action. All right.
What did you think of Judith Collins' attack on Susie Wiles?
Like I said, I just, I think we should all lead by example, of course. We should be kind, and we should sometimes reserve our judgment on others. Thanks, everybody.
Any ideas or favourite front runners for the vaccine bus?
Sorry, I don't have anything on that.
Prime Minister might update tomorrow on that.
Ina mana, ina reo, ina karangatanga maha, tēnā koutou katoa. Before I begin today, I'll hand over to Dr. Bloomfield to give us the latest case numbers. Dr. Bloomfield.
Ngā mihi pirimia. Tuatahi, e mihi ana kia koutou katoa, e whakarongo mai ana. E mihi ana ki te kaupapa o te wihi anō hoki, ara ko te wihi o te reo Māori. We're in the second day, as you know, of te wihi o te reo Māori, Māori Language Week. Kia kaha te reo Māori. On the Auckland outbreak today, we are reporting 15 new community cases of COVID-19, and they are all in the Auckland area. That takes our total number of cases in this outbreak to 970, of whom 397 people have now recovered, which is good news. The fall in the number of cases today is encouraging, and even more encouraging is that there are no unlinked cases today. All of these new cases are household contacts from 5 known households, with the majority linked to just 3 households. We do know, of course, that Delta spreads more easily within households, so to some extent, these new cases were expected. While some of these houses have not yet been epi-linked to the wider outbreak, they have not popped up unexpectedly. Furthermore, you will recall that just one case from yesterday was, as at the point in time we announced yesterday, not linked to the outbreak. That case has now been linked. The number of cases in the last 14 days that are not yet epidemiologically linked has now fallen to 10. There are 22 people currently in Auckland hospitals, and of those, 4 are in intensive care and all require ventilation. It does remain crucial we maintain high levels of testing in Auckland to detect any final cases of COVID-19 that there may be in the community. High rates of testing will help Auckland get out of lockdown as planned and stay out. Our priority is now on testing as many people as possible over coming days from the following suburbs in Tamaki Makaurau: Massey, Mangere, Whawona, Papatoetoe, Otara and Manurewa. If you live in these suburbs and you have symptoms, please do and go get a test. If you receive an invitation to be tested, even if you have no symptoms, I would encourage you strongly to take up that invitation too. It is part of our surveillance that we are doing in these suburbs. Of course, anyone across Auckland and indeed New Zealand with cold or flu symptoms, no matter how mild, please come forward for testing. The latest data on influenza-like illness from ESR shows very low rates in the community, so it is particularly important that anyone with symptoms does get tested. We also encourage families with children to get tested altogether, as we are seeing COVID-19 cases in children, including quite a number in this outbreak. So if you're going out for a COVID-19 test, bring your whānau with you. Surveillance testing of essential workers continues across Auckland because they are out and about during Alert Level 4. A wide range of essential workers from a range of industries have been asked to get tested, even without COVID symptoms. These include healthcare, emergency services, workers at petrol stations, transport workers, supermarkets and dairies. Those who are permitted to cross the Auckland Alert Level boundaries are also required, of course, to provide proof of a test within the last 7 days. And so far, this month, since the 1st of September, we have tested 15,685 essential workers across the Auckland region with no positive cases identified. In terms of that testing for people crossing the Auckland boundary, nasopharyngeal swabbing is available, of course, nationwide, whether those workers are in Tamaki Makaurau or outside. Available at testing centres, community testing centres, GP practices, and for a list of testing places, please do go to Health Point. Testing, as ever, is free, and please let the tester know that you are doing it for the purposes of crossing the alert level boundary as a permitted worker. On contact tracing, we're now focusing our efforts on 1,242 contacts that are under active management. This is a change to the reporting total contacts for the whole outbreak. The number of contacts under active management is now down to a much smaller number, as I said, over the last 2 weeks, as the majority of our contacts have now either returned to negative tests or have had exposures more than 18 days ago, and we are not generating significant numbers of new contacts outside of households now. On the wastewater side, there was a positive wastewater result received from a sample taken last week in Pukekohe. Our public health team in Auckland advised that there have been 4 cases in the area who have previously been in quarantine, who have now returned home. This could explain the result, but what I would like to say is anyone in the Pukekohe area who has symptoms, please do go and get tested. There is pop-up testing available there, and they have increased the people at that pop-up testing to make sure there is sufficient capacity today. There have been no other unexpected detections in wastewater samples taken in Auckland or around the country. Just a reminder too that our hospitals are safe. I've spoken with and had communication from Counties Manako's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Pete Watson, reminding people in South Auckland, if you need emergency care, do not hesitate to go to the emergency department. There are strict protocols in place to keep you safe and of course to keep staff safe. All staff are using N95 masks, goggles and gowns. Everyone who arrives at the ED is very carefully assessed to see if there might have been any exposure to COVID-19. If there's any doubt, they are treated as if they could be. Patients who may have been exposed to COVID-19 or who have symptoms are kept separate from other patients. And Middlemore Hospital is now testing a higher proportion of patients to be extra precautionary who are arriving at ED. Finally, a shout out today for hard-working Auckland paramedics who continue to go each day into the homes of hundreds of Aucklanders to assess them and take care of them and transport them to hospital if needed, despite the current outbreak. Thank you for your dedication to the wellbeing of Aucklanders. Heoi anō, ka nui tēnā, kia ora koutou katoa. Back to you, Prime Minister.
Ngā mihi, Dr. Bloomfield. You may have guessed the theme over the past couple of days has been vaccinate, 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 with a particular focus on Tamaki Makaurau and what we intend to be their last week in level 4. As I said yesterday, there is nothing holding us back in Auckland when it comes to vaccines. There is capacity to administer 220,000 doses of the vaccine in the region this week. If around 130 of those are people's first dose, Aucklanders will hit 80% coverage of first vaccinations in 1 week's time, and we'll be well on our way to the city being better protected against the virus. Let me be clear on why is it important. It literally saves lives and prevents hospitalisations. There's real-world evidence here in New Zealand and internationally that proves you're far less likely to get COVID and far less likely to get sick and need to go to hospital if you are vaccinated. Getting vaccinated protects you, your family, your loved ones and our economy. That's why it's so important to everyone, but especially those in Tamaki Makaurau, to get vaccinated as soon as possible. In fact, if you're sitting at home in Auckland watching this now or listening on the radio and you are yet to get your first vaccine, I'm going to suggest that as soon as I've wrapped up, you go and make a booking. That includes people who may have bookings later in the month or in October. Chances are you'll be able to bring that booking forward to this week. You can do this online at Book My Vaccine. Just remember, though, to cancel your original booking. There are around 90,000 available spaces in Book My Vaccine in Auckland for this week, so bringing forward a booking shouldn't be a problem. And you can also try your GP. More GP clinics and pharmacies are coming online every day. There are now more than 100 GPs and 30 pharmacies delivering vaccinations across Auckland, so give them a call and see if they have any spaces available this week. Meanwhile, our 2 drive-through sites at the Auckland Airport Park and Ride and Truss Arena in Henderson can do over 5,000 per day across each site. No booking is required. You can simply show up. As well as these standard options, there are some other great examples of initiatives that are making the vaccine accessible to everyone. I thought I would touch on a few of them briefly. A pop-up clinic at the University of Auckland for on-site residents, students and staff began on Saturday and has its final day today. It's in the Owen Glen building on Grafton Road. The Northern Region Health Coordination Centre has been running vaccination centres at 4 specialist schools in Auckland, Somerville, Parkside, Wairau Valley and Wilson, with hundreds of students and their families vaccinated at those sites over the last 2 weeks. International evidence tells us that COVID has caused disproportionate harm for disabled people, so we're working hard to get the vaccine to this group of New Zealanders. This morning, Minister for Disability Issues, Carmel Sepuloni, helped launch a Taikura Trust initiative at Papakura Marae to get disabled people vaccinated. They will be prioritising vaccinations for the disabled all week at the marae. The clinic is open from 9 till 3, Monday to Friday, at 29 Hanua Road, Papakura. You don't have to book, but try to be there by 2 p.m. at least, at the latest, so you can be processed. This follows similar initiatives elsewhere in the country. For example, the Hutt Valley DHB and Autism New Zealand provided an autism-friendly vaccination option in Petone. I've heard really encouraging stories of those with autism who have never before participated in a vaccination program accessing a vaccine against COVID. Now, there's been much talk of a Mr. Whippy-style mobile vaccine bus or portable vaccinations. I'm pleased to confirm that the Northern Region Health Coordination Centre will launch its first buses this Thursday. The initial plan is to take them into areas where we know vaccination numbers have been low or people have not been able to access vaccination services as easily. The aim is to increase the network from an expected 6 on Thursday to 12 over the coming weeks. A huge thanks to Auckland Airport and Bus Travel New Zealand, who have supplied buses for this work. I know in Australia they've started operating something similar and have named their mobile outreach clinics Jabba the Bus. I'm sure that we can do better. The vaccine is the best tool we have in our toolbox and our ticket to greater freedoms. The more people who are vaccinated, the fewer restrictions that you have to have. Just as we've been world leading with the success of our elimination strategy, in the future I want New Zealand to be world leading both on the level of freedoms and our health and well-being. And high rates of vaccination is how we can achieve just that. We're now open for questions.
Have you had any updates?
And then I'll come to
have you had any updates yet on whether there is a surge starting in Auckland, whether people are starting to turn up in numbers for vaccines?
No, I haven't had an update on that. We do know that, if my recollection is correct, that the 3rd of September was the last date where we had the highest reach. And you would expect that during that period of lockdown in those initial days, we really did have a large number come through. But my message to Aucklanders is you don't need to wait. If you have already booked, but it's not till October, bring it forward. If you've not yet booked anything, please go today to one of our drive-through sites. We want to vaccinate as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, and that goes for all of Aotearoa New Zealand.
Why doesn't the Health Ministry have any plans to randomly test shoppers at places like supermarkets and the known virus hotspots?
Yeah, so we've discussed this question quite a lot. We've talked about the past where supermarkets have been used. And in the past, what our health team have advised us is that supermarkets have been used well when you have, for instance, a wastewater test and you want to do a lot of surveillance testing very, very quickly in certain sites where you haven't had ongoing testing. Their feedback has been that in the current environment, that their testing stations they've established for symptomatic and their asymptomatic plans are still reaching into those communities at high rates. But we continue to say, let's consider everything, and certainly supermarkets have been on our agenda for something that should be considered.
Yes, and just one other point to make is rather than random testing, the testing that's happening in Auckland is targeting specific suburbs where there are households that there is a sense there could be other cases out in the community. So they're not randomly going along and picking people out, but they're just messaging out into those communities, and we're seeing really good rates of testing.
Yeah, there's a particular pack and save in Auckland that's been noted as a location of interest, I think 6 times now. Would it make sense to try and capture that community as
that supermarket?
That supermarket?
Yeah, look, I take advice from our team in Auckland. They've been doing this for a while through several outbreaks now, and their current thinking is very much that actually they've got good coverage in the suburbs to cover off those populations they want to get the surveillance testing of. And they do have some experience having tried it before and not finding very high rates of take-up, because people, if they're going to the supermarket, excuse me, may well be joining a queue for their to get their groceries, and it may be a lengthy outing already.
We're hearing from some Aucklanders that you're asking them to get tested, but some of them can't get to the testing sites. Is more effort required to expand the mobile testing teams to get to those who don't have cars or can't afford to travel?
We do use mobile testing.
Yeah, look, there are still over 20 community testing centres set up, as well as, of course, general practices and urgent care clinics. And I know that they are using the mobile testing teams to get out, and particularly into those suburbs where they are looking to do the surveillance testing.
Look, I'll ask the question about the team, because we've talked a lot about the use of supermarkets, because look, ultimately what we want to do is reach into certain communities and get good levels of testing of those with mild symptoms, but also have our teams reach in and determine who they want to do that asymptomatic testing of. And it's just a matter of where and how you find those people. We've raised the option of supermarkets. The team on the ground have had a particular view of how they see it as being best done, but we'll ask the question about the pack and save, because it's a good question to ask.
Can I ask you about
Cabinet paper in August last year, which I'll quote to you, vaccines for early delivery will be more expensive. Example, 75 to 150 per dose compared to later delivery, perhaps less than $15 per dose. Modelling suggests the size of the funding required is highly sensitive to the number of early access vaccines that we choose to purchase. The government then didn't announce our advance purchase agreements till October. Did Cabinet decide not to try ordering?
Absolutely not. I do not need to go back and look at any Cabinet papers from that length of time to tell you that we absolutely did not make a decision to delay vaccine for price purposes. Absolutely not.
So we went to those companies and asked for early access.
In all of our advanced purchase arrangements, keep in mind, we were in talks with vaccine companies who were at that time promoting vaccines that hadn't even finished their clinical trials. But we were entering into discussions and arrangements and sometimes purchase agreements before completion, simply so we could make sure we were in line to receive doses if they then proved to be safe. And so we entered in those negotiations very early on, but I can tell you at no point did we, for instance, say, we'll delay ordering something from there so it will be cheaper. Absolutely not.
To be clear though, we did seek those higher priced early access vaccines.
My recollection of all of the negotiations was that we were entering into discussions as soon as we could for those vaccines across our portfolio, because you'll remember that we chose multiple vaccines because there were different ones under trial, RNA vaccines, AstraZeneca, those who are slightly more traditional. We were entering into discussions with all of those to cover ourselves so that if one proved to be unsuccessful, we'd have alternate options. That was the basis of our choices and our negotiations, not price point. We wanted the best vaccines possible for New Zealanders.
But the Cabinet did make a conscious choice to try for those early access vaccines, even though the prices were high.
Yes, that's my absolute. At no point did we say we're opting out of any of those options because of price. It was all about efficacy. Which ones cover us? Because as you saw, there were a range being developed, and our portfolio was all about how do we make sure that we're covering all our bases, keeping all our options open while everything's in a trial stage.
In May, June, July, many countries had already announced advanced purchase agreements. Were we late to that process?
No. So you can see that we often announced advanced purchase agreements well before even clinical trials were completed, and then at different stages, different countries then engaged in rollouts depending on their comfort level with where those trials were at and their regulatory processes. So that often determined a difference for most countries. Okay, I'll come down the back to Jason.
Prime Minister, would it be your expectation that if police saw a funeral or a tangi happening somewhere in the community with well over 50 people, with a lot of people unmasked, that they would work to break that up?
I'm not from the vantage point here going to give a view on how police undertake their operational duties. They are best placed to make those decisions in the moment in time. They, of course, know the orders that they are able to enforce, and we leave it to them to do their job.
Shouldn't it be a blanket rule that if that is happening in the community?
Well, the order and the ability to enforce exists, but we leave it up to the police to determine how and when that is done. Those are all operational decisions, and they, of course, in those moments, are best placed to determine how to do that safely.
So you would be disappointed to see a large-scale gathering in level 4?
I'm not going to stand here and make judgments around the way that police are doing their job. It's their job, and it's a hard job. But look, from time to time, we have seen from time to time breaches that is not representative of what the vast majority of New Zealanders are doing, and the police, do a good job on our behalf of dealing with those scenarios when they arise. Yeah, in the front.
Have you given the police any advice, and if so, what was that advice around the couple that travelled to Wanaka previously? They've said in situations where people have breached the health order that they've taken advice and leave from health officials.
We haven't been asked to give any advice to police, and the matter for prosecution is in their hands, and I think it's very clear in the order what the expectations are, so I don't think they've needed to come back to us for any further advice on that.
Why haven't they come to you? Last August, I think, or maybe in February this year, when there were other health order breaches, there was the police would come to you or the ministry?
Some cases you were involved in as Director General taking a role, but these are very clearly set out in the orders.
Yeah, it must have been a different scenario. I do recall the one you're talking about, but there was a different scenario, and yes, they were asking us, in a sense, to lay the complaint with police and advise around prosecution. That's not necessary in this case.
Yeah.
Is the ministry or MedSafe working on improving COVID-19 drugs such as, and you'll have to excuse my pronunciation of these, Regencov or Sotrovimab, for preventing illness, and if not, why not?
Is it treatment of illness, I believe?
Yes, so we've got efforts going on to both, of course, follow the evidence around emerging treatments. Pharmac is part of those efforts to ensure that if there are effective medications, that those can then be funded. And I do know that there is a medication that was approved in the UK a couple of weeks ago, and an application is with MedSafe that was put in really quite quickly and is going through their process at the moment.
Australia approved one of them last month, and the US approved another one of them back in May. Why is it taking so long to approve them here?
I just need to know exactly which medications they were, and I can check in with MedSafe to see that they may well have had applications, but they can't approve a medicine until an application comes in and all the evidence is provided. But I'm happy to follow that one up.
Some of them are existing drugs that are then used for the treatment of COVID-19, so that also may be a complicating factor.
Prime Minister, on vaccination rates,
Ben.
Thank you. The 55,000 today, I think, is the worst day in a month when you take out weekends and the day that you couldn't vaccinate. What's the advice on why it's so low, and is it good enough?
Well, I mean, keeping in mind that, of course, at some of our highest planned rates previously, we were scheduled to be around the 50,000 mark. So circumstances have definitely led us to be in a position where we know that we have the capability and the capacity to go much higher than that. And so really that's my message today. We know we have that capacity. We know that we can do more. So for everyone that is currently booked and might be just waiting their turn, the message we're sending out is you can bring that forward, and you should bring it forward. Get vaccinated as soon as possible.
That number, because it does feel low compared to the last 3 weeks. Were you expecting this natural drop-off?
Look, so we do within the team, of course, there's a number of things that you expect to see with the distance between from when you have a large number of first doses, that then you then get large numbers, of course, when they come through for those seconds, when they're due to it in 21 days to 6 weeks' time. So there's lots of modelling around what to expect then. The modelling in this period of time has been difficult because we've seen such extraordinary rates. So we've already moved away really from those planned projections where we had anticipated that at a maximum we would be doing 50,000 a day. We're doing more than that, and we've consistently done more than that, and now we're telling New Zealanders, you can keep going. We've got the capability to do that.
I also asked on the flower protest outside Parliament. I understand Ashley Bloomfield was given a bouquet of flowers. Do you have sympathy for the hundreds of thousands of flowers that have had to be mulched over the last month?
I do, and they sit alongside a number of industries where, because our goal at this point is just to limit as much contact between people as possible, that they haven't been able to go about their usual jobs and their usual livelihoods. And I can only imagine how tough that would be. Yep.
Why can't they sell at a level 4? And will
It's all about cumulative risk. So the people that are operating at level 4, of course, are those that are determined that we need in order for New Zealanders to continue to survive and continue as much as possible those essentials of life. And so that heavily falls around food production. But you can see in Auckland that we've actually had a number of cases that have happened in those food production environments. So we try and reduce risk simply by having as few people who need to be working as possible.
Why is moving the school holidays, sorry, on another topic, why is moving the school holidays only being looked at now at the last minute?
It's been under consideration for a while. The complexity, of course, being that that for our teaching workforce, they are working through lockdown, so they continue to work, and then essentially what you'd be asking is for that then to continue on in the aftermath of lockdowns as well. So it's very much, wider considerations around workforce as well.
Is it appropriate?
Sorry, I'll just come to a few who haven't had questions, and I'll come to Whati and then I'll come to you.
Dr. Bloomfield, are you concerned at all around the mental well-being of Aucklanders with the extension? And are you also confident that there's adequate mental health and wellbeing services available to people in Tamaki with COVID?
Kia ora, thanks for that question. Yes, I am concerned. We know that the lockdown period is tough on people, and in particular, the feedback I've had is that it's really impacting on young people there. What I have been asking and been getting from my team is a readout on what service usage we are getting. And we're not seeing big spikes, including, for example, in the 1737 number, but there is a range of services available for people. So I guess what I would be wanting to do is encourage people, if they are stressed, anxious, and finding it a bit of a struggle, to reach out and get support because it is available.
Consideration also for COVID positive cases who might find it quite overwhelming to try and reintegrate themselves back into their communities, back into work at all, and how will they be supported?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a thing. I mean, having COVID-19 is often people are unwell, but also there's still that sort of a little bit of stigma and other things that can go around it. I know that our public health teams do keep in contact with and provide support to whānau and to individuals who are discharged, for example, back out of quarantine into the community, and it's great to see many people now have recovered. So there is that opportunity to ask and have questions answered and just make sure that those people are getting the support they need as they reintegrate back into the community.
Pati, when we had our conversation as a cabinet around the extension of Alert Level 4 for Tamaki Makaurau, one of the conversations we particularly had was around the impact on tamariki and rangatahi. We are concerned about, those lengthy periods of time where people aren't around, friends and whānau. But we also know that we need to put in the supports for those young people, but also do as much as we can to get as much normality as quickly as possible back for them. And I'm mindful in some countries, they've had very long periods where their children have been unable to go to kura to engage with others, and we want to avoid that too. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Bloomfield, so all of today's cases are household contacts. Can you explain why we're still seeing household contacts this far into lockdown? Surely you would run through them.
Yeah.
Two reasons. The first is that some of these are households that have only been identified in the last week or two. You'll recall that, especially through the last week, we had several people who received services at Middlemore Hospital in a range of different places. And in following up those individuals, that led to households with others who had been exposed to the virus. And so we're seeing those cases coming through now. And the second is, of course, that the incubation period can be quite lengthy for some people. And so, again, we've seen at least or around 16% of people testing positive at their day 12 test, even though the index case may have been found, nearly 2 weeks prior to that.
Yeah, and particularly when you've got large families, you can have just the knock-on as it goes through. So someone may originally have been infected some time ago, but we're then seeing the wider family being successively then infected. And then, sadly, in some cases it's taking until one of them becomes very unwell till they're seeking medical attention.
Would it be appropriate?
Yeah, do you mind if I come to Charlie and then I'll come back to you?
Sean Handy has said that population immunity would have been possible with previous variants and the vaccines we have, but now that's probably not going to be the case with Delta. How does this affect, New Zealand's COVID response in the short and long term?
Yeah. So I think what Sean's reflecting is something that we've talked a little bit about over the course of the last few weeks. In fact, right back to when we launched the Reconnecting New Zealand strategy, which was factoring in the fact that Delta was changing things up. And what I think, Sean Hendy is referring to is the fact that we are seeing different rates of transmission in vaccinated people with the Delta virus than necessarily what you might have seen with other variants. However, that does not necessarily mean that it is any less successful in keeping people safe, because we are still seeing very, very high levels of effectiveness when it comes to hospitalisations and deaths. But because of that transmission and those breakthrough infections, it does change the dynamic. And that's why I think you're seeing countries around the world changing up their strategies. Whether you're looking at Singapore or any of the EU countries, you do see them altering their strategies and their use of restrictions as a result. Likewise, we're reflecting on ours. Elimination continues to be the best option for New Zealand at this point in time while we vaccinate New Zealanders. The next stage, of course, is continuing to vaccinate and get the highest rates possible. Then we're able to determine from there what we couple together around vaccination to continue to keep the highest levels of safety and freedoms as possible. But you'll see every country still using restrictions. We just don't want to use the highest alert levels as part of them.
Just
And then I'll come to you, Derek.
clarification on the Mr. Whippy style bus. Was that in the Northland region, not north of Auckland? And did you have any ideas for a name yourself?
So that's being developed by the team that are working across Auckland and testing across Auckland. I'd need to come to Dr. Bloomfield as to whether or not we're seeing those in other DHBs, but initially that's the region that you'll be seeing the use of those. No, I haven't got any bus ideas, but I'll leave it in the hands of creative New Zealanders. I know that when you've seen challenges like this put out, you see enormous amounts of creativity, but I think probably Bussy McBussface is probably already a given.
When New Zealanders get to vote, you know?
Yeah, I am. Look, how about we see how many suggestions come through? I'll pop something on my social media and then we can vote on one of them. But let's rule out Bussy McBussface right from the beginning.
Would it be appropriate?
I did promise I'd give Derek a... Oh, I'll let you have your second and then I'll come to Derek.
And just on vaccinations, vaccination status has been pretty widely used overseas for going into businesses and even employment, and we're starting to see that here, perhaps with competitions and starting to be with employment. Is that something you support, and are you seeing any legal issues with that in the future?
I support anything that works, and so we have had a team, including those with a background in human behaviour and psychology, look at the different incentives that have been used in other countries. You know, major factor for me will be, does it work in bringing out more people to be vaccinated? And secondly, just making sure it's fair. You don't want a situation where you suddenly bring in an incentive that those who have shown up early miss out on. But I continue to be really open-minded. So if anyone brings to us an idea that we think will make a difference, we'd be happy to take those on, because it's good for all of us if we have as many people as possible being vaccinated. Your thoughts, Dr. Bloomfield?
I couldn't agree more. And to go back to the earlier question about the modelling and around Delta, it says what it emphasises is the importance of vaccinating. It doesn't mean that vaccination is not helpful. It means that we need to get an even higher rate.
Yeah.
It's very, very important we do so. And just to sort of, from this outbreak, the latest data I had a look at just before I came down, around 78% of those who are eligible, that is 12 and over, of our cases were unvaccinated, and just 4% were fully vaccinated. So it's living proof of the protection that vaccination does give when Delta is in the community.
And none of those fully vaccinated people are hospitalised, for instance.
I just wanted to...
yeah. Oh, sorry, Derek. Sorry.
Follow on from Katie's question about the treatment of COVID illness. If there's anything that is on your radar that has been working in one of the US things. So one of the treatments that was approved in the US is by Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, which make free monoclonal antibodies. Is that something that's on your radar?
I do know there is a number of medications that are being looked at the moment, and if you don't mind, maybe I can make that give that a bit of an emphasis for my comments tomorrow, and come well prepared to talk to that specifically.
Yeah. So one general comment. Some of the, not to get into much detail, but some of the treatments that I've seen some reporting on has to be applied very early on into someone's infection. And equally, very early stages, I think, in where they've been used in some countries, sometimes where they've had much larger outbreaks, and enormously expensive, and still waiting for someone who has COVID and then is being treated. The best thing we can still do is vaccinate. That prevents us being in a situation where we're treating people after the fact. But, of course, we continue to look at all these options for treatment as well.
One thing I can say categorically about treatment here now, ivermectin is not a proven safe treatment for COVID-19. I receive dozens of emails a day promoting it, but I can say that there are existing medications that have been shown to be helpful for people, particularly with more severe illness. Ivermectin is not one, and I'd certainly encourage people strongly not to take ivermectin, either as a preventive or for treatment of any symptoms that could be COVID-related.
Yeah.
Can I just ask
Good point. We'll let you finish, Derek.
You gave some pretty big reassurances about a Kiwi summer yesterday. How do you propose that will
I think I gave you my aspiration.
How do you propose that would work with the planned phased reopening of the border when it's pretty much considered it would be inevitable that we would have cases in the
Well, actually, no, I think I would challenge that. You will have seen that when we released our plans around reopening, which still stand, they were still all about preventing cases at the border. And so that's still a key part of that work, because it was a key part of the advice from Professor David Skegg. And so the comments that I was making around a Kiwi summer is really what we want to do is try and think of the kinds of measures that you might want to have in place. I mean, regardless of what might happen over the course of a summer, what can we do to try and ensure that some of those events can continue on regardless? Are there options for us that mean we can give that level of certainty? It might take an ask on behalf of all of us around the way we behave or what we do, but let's see if there are those measures that we can apply. So that's the active question I'm asking of the teams, so that we can just have that bit more of certainty. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Would it be appropriate for the Climate Change Minister and the COP delegation to take part in the self-isolation trial upon their return? And doesn't that risk calls of special treatment for the minister?
No. So, look, no decisions have been made about specifically who is able to participate at this stage. We have left open the opportunity or the possibility of government officials, because we, for instance, there are two reasons for that. A, it gives us the ability to actually get very close feedback from those who work within government into how it's working, and also B, we have a very small number of people who do have to travel for their work, trade delegations in particular, where they've already been travelled and have already experienced MIQ. One of the issues with the COP delegation is whether or not they would fit within the time periods that we've set for the trial. I think they might leave and return. I can't quite recall whether or not they would, but no decisions have been taken at this stage.
But why is it so important for that COP delegation to go when there are so many Kiwis wanting to come home and can't get spots in MIQ, or businesses who need to send people overseas?
So we are still, of course, we still continue on a regular basis to have anywhere between 4,000 and 5,000 people coming into New Zealand and into our managed isolation facilities over the course of a fortnight. There are a small number who may be from within government agencies who need to continue to travel to ensure that New Zealand is represented in critical talks, like, for instance, trade talks for our UK trade agreement or our EU trade agreement, or, for instance, in important negotiations around climate work. We are scaling back those delegations. They are irregular. In fact, my recollection is that we have only had one minister throughout this period who has used our managed isolation facilities.
Is there any update on when those bookings will resume for MIQ?
So there have been talks about when we'll be doing that, keeping in mind that's the regular ballots, and I imagine we'll have more to say on that soon. People are still coming in. It's just we usually have a regular release of vouchers, and that hasn't been happening for a little bit because we've had to prioritise those in the outbreak in New Zealand into going into our managed isolation facilities, and I think people understand why. Luke.
A couple of things. Firstly,
do
you have any information on how these two people who breached the Auckland lockdown ended up in Wanaka, and about how they got back to Auckland?
No, I don't have any information on that other than what's in the public domain, but I imagine that the police are looking into that as part of their investigation.
Yeah.
Question, do we have a headline figure of the 900 some cases in this outbreak of how many people who caught COVID had one or both vaccines?
Yes, we do have breakdowns on all of that. Forgive me, I
Yes.
don't have those figures in front of me right now.
I've got them here, and I mentioned sort of the headline figures before, but what I might do is come back to you because I've got the numbers here for the total 955 people, but I then went and asked for them to take out the 0 to 11s who are not eligible, but the headline percentages I gave before are up to date and based on just the 12 and overs, and that is 78% of people no vaccines and just 4% fully vaccinated. That is, they've had their second vaccine at least 2 weeks before they became a case.
And this is where Andrew gets grumpy with me because he gave me those numbers on the way down and I didn't bring them with me. So we can provide them. Okay, Thomas.
Just on the James Shaw potentially taking part in the self-isolation trial.
But
yes, no, totally hypothetical. But
yeah,
just,
I don't think it's likely at this stage,
no,
but go ahead.
Would the UK qualify as one of the approved list of countries in that trial?
So all of that work is still underway, and so there's a number of factors, including the criteria, those participating countries, what would be required of those participants, as in what would be a suitable facility or home or so on, and the way that they even access testing. All of that's being developed. It's been narrowed down, so I've seen initial briefings on it. And we would be looking to run it really substantively across, the parts of November is when we're looking. So it does, of course, mean we do want to see Auckland in a better position than they are now before we run it as well.
And on COP, Reuters is reporting that the US and the EU are about to launch a call for countries to set a 30% reduction in biogenic methane emissions by 2030. New Zealand is named as one of the 12 countries which is on the naughty list in this call. Have you had any overtures from ambassadors on that target, and what is your likely response to?
So two points that I would make. The first is that our targets are based on the IPCC reports on methane reduction. So that's where we based our target ranges. So we've tried to really lean into the international science in this space. Because it's important to us and it's important that we do our bit. And the second point I'd make is, of course, we do that in the context of those emissions derived from food production